All right, we will go ahead and get started. Thank you all for joining us this morning. We're excited to have you here. For some of you, this is perhaps the first program you've joined this week. For others, maybe this is the fifth time we've seen you, or at least more than once. This is our fifth and last program this week in a series as part of Countdown to College, our first ever Education Professionals Week. And we've been excited to bring you different topics such as Countdown to College Basics and how that works, our Professional Center, as well as our Best Practices panel that we had Monday with a counselor and a college advisor for College Application Week. We've been able to bring you information this week on Finish the FAFSA, FAFSA Tracker, and FAFSA Challenge with SEAA and My Future NC, information on RDS. Yesterday, we had a session specifically on College Application Week where we discussed applications, transcripts, and fee waivers. And today we bring you some information on college access and COVID. Today's presentation is entitled Keeping Students on Track and Excited for Post-Secondary Education. And I think we have some good information to bring you today, but today's panel is a tiny bit different from some of the other sessions this week if you've joined us, and that we'd really love to hear from you all and get your feedback and any ideas you might have, things that you might also be doing that you think would be helpful to share with the other folks on today. So feel free to use that questions pane that should be on the right side of your screen, either to send in questions, or if you have some thoughts or an idea, maybe perhaps you have used something we've talked about and it went well, or you did it differently, feel free to send that over and we'd love to share it with the group. We have too large of a group this morning to take off mute, so we can't quite do it that way, but we'd love to share any ideas that you have. A couple of notes before we begin. Please do remain muted. This program is being recorded, and all of the programs from this week will be available mid to end next week in two different locations. One will be on CFNC's YouTube channel. We will have a special playlist just for this week, and it will be called CCC Education Professionals Week, and all of the recordings will be there. In addition to that, on our website at cfnc.org/CCC, where you found the information on here to register, the recordings will be, a link to the recordings will also be there. So those will be available mid to end next week. Your CEUs that you earned for attending today will be emailed to you within 24 hours. And then lastly, on the right-hand side of your screen, you should also see a handout pane, and that has today's PowerPoint for you to access there. So today's speakers, we have Suzanne, and she is the Student Support and Transition Specialist with Buncombe County Schools. We're going to hear from her first, and then we'll hear from Fred Holden, who is the Financial Aid Director at UNCW over here on the East Coast with me. And then I'm April Cleary. I'm the CFNC Regional and Community Services Manager. I've been with CFNC for about 15 years, and I lead our outreach team here at CFNC and get to do fun things like put Education Professionals Week together. So again, we're excited to have you. Some of the things that we're going to talk about today are mental health tips for students, self-care on your side and the student side. We're going to talk a little bit about college access motivation, especially as it relates to COVID. We had some students that we always had to work with for motivation for college access, whatever post-secondary education might look like for them, 2-year, 4-year, in-state, out-of-state, public, private, certificate apprenticeship programs. But COVID has, as you all know, provided a new challenge for all of us, not that you needed a new challenge, but we have a good number of students, as we'll talk about in just a moment, who have spent this last 18 months or so having competing priorities, such as working more hours to help make ends meet in their home, family members who have possibly gotten sick or died from COVID, lots of different stressors. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that, parent involvement, and then we're going to move into the idea of all of this kind of on the college campus. And Fred Holden will talk to us a little bit about financial aid, just to give us some basic information about that. And we'll talk a little bit about food insecurities, different things that campuses might be doing with that, and take some questions and so on from there, and give you a lot of resources, hopefully, at the end of this presentation. So there's, if you research some different articles or peer-reviewed studies, whatever it might be, on how COVID has impacted college access. This has only been going on for about 18 months. So there's not a slew of, true peer-reviewed information that's out there at the moment in relation to college access and COVID-19 and mental health and all that area of teams. But we all know that there's plenty of, qualitative evidence that we have noticed ourselves working with our students. And Kaiser Family Foundation, who's a nonprofit, they have issued a brief in relation to what we're talking about this morning. And I wanted to provide you with some of the information that they offer first before I move on to have Suzanne talk to you all. And there's a link at the bottom here that shows you where the article is located. But they talk about some of the COVID-related mental health challenges that we already know about, right? So school closures, social distancing, loneliness, isolation, job insecurity with their families, financial concerns, etc. And that's where this leads into us also talking about financial aid this morning, in that we have a good number of students that have a lot of financial concerns, whether it relates to paying for post-secondary education or helping to make sure that the power stays on at their house. And so it's all very much related. So at the same time, all of this has been going on, pediatric mental health services have declined sharply since COVID began about 18 months ago. So those two pieces should not be going together, right? We should see mental health services increasing, but we don't. And in addition, we have certain pockets of minority or vulnerable youth who we need to think about special concerns for. So for example, LGBTQ youth and children of color, they have shown higher levels of anxiety, depression, lower levels of mental health services, accessing those services compared to white children who may have different types of access at school as well. And so we'll see what's going to come out of this and what the funding will end up being, truly spent on. But the American Rescue Plan Act does allocate funding, as you all know, for children's mental health services. And this is one of the figures that I thought was very helpful for us this morning, specifically from that Kaiser Family Foundation study, which the link is in here also. If we look at sources of mental health services among adolescents in the last year, in education settings is very high among where they're getting, mental health services. So you all are extremely essential for our families and students as we work through what we've been going through the last 18 months and, what's not over yet. Okay? And then one other resource I wanted to provide you with as we start talking about all of this morning is from the National Student Clearinghouse, and it's the study that they did back in April. And this relates to post-secondary enrollment specifically. Okay? So nationwide, we have seen post-secondary enrollment take a steep decline, especially with our community colleges. We also have seen decline in North Carolina, especially in certain pockets, certain institutions. So community college enrollment, HBCU enrollment. So we have seen enrollment down at some of our institutions also. And as I talked about earlier, students have competing priorities. And when we'll talk about this in a few minutes, but when they're experiencing this level of trauma and this type of trauma, it's difficult for students to, see long term and figure out what my life might look like after all of this is over, especially when all you can do is deal with the day to day. Well, I know I can go to school tomorrow, but I have someone who's sick, and I don't know what next week will look like. And even for those of us, working adults, it's the same sort of situation. So, for example, my children are 1 and 4, and they are in a child development center here in Wilmington. And I don't know from day to day if they are going to be in school or at home with me, because we have had several faculty members, staff members at the college where they go have COVID. There's exposure risk. They'll close down for 10 days. And so it's the same sort of bit of, day to day. I'm not sure what tomorrow is going to look like. They're in school today, but when am I going to get a call again saying, come pick them up, we've got to close for 10 more days, and then trying to juggle everything. So we're all kind of experiencing this together. So I'm going to stop talking and pass this over to Suzanne Gavanis, and she's going to provide you with some great information, and feel free to send questions or chat over. Thank you, Suzanne.
All right, thank you, and good morning, everybody. My portion is going to be pretty informal and almost conversational, I guess. I'm going to be giving you some information and asking you to think about some things, and since we can't come off mute and reply, I want you to put some things in the questions as if that were your chat. And so I work at Buncombe County Schools. I work at the district office, and I support 44 schools in professional development and planning activities to think about getting our students career, college, and community ready when they leave us. When we think about helping our students, I want us to first think about ourselves and what was our path to college like. For myself, was pretty unique. I have to tell you, the first part of my career, I spent working a little bit in wilderness education and in as a therapist in individual community settings, hospital settings, and then I transitioned over to the school setting in the second half of my career, which is where I am now. But my path to college, I was non-traditional. I dropped out of high school and then went to a community college and thought, you know what, that worked. I can do that. Let's look at what is the next step. Went on to my bachelor's and then went on to graduate school. So that was a little non-traditional way of getting there. And when I think about my inspiration, I think it was, at that time, I was a first-generation college student. So seeing my peers and seeing what they were doing in their life. And probably my biggest champions were the adults along the way who believed in me, who helped me with financial aid. Now, we didn't have nearly the resources that we have now, but it definitely was the people who maybe were already in the places that I wanted to get to, which was higher ed. So if you're comfortable, I want you to share something in the chat about how you got to college. Do you have your bachelor's, your graduate? Who was your inspiration? Was it a parent or a sibling or a teacher maybe that you had? And if you're comfortable sharing, who helped you along the way? So just type in the question box and let's just see where people are at, because I think we need to think about our why so that we can help our students develop their why for post-secondary education. And I don't know if anybody's typed yet or if I can't see it. And maybe this is something, April, is that you?
Yeah, I can help if you'd like read some of these aloud. I think it's great to have these coming in. So,
I see them now. Okay, I see the chat.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, yeah, you can read some of them if you want, because you may be a little better at seeing these.
So we've got some folks that say they were lucky. Their parents were educators and grandfathers lived with them, and they were very supporting. And, some students were, engaging and had great CTE teachers. We've got parents here. Parents had bachelor's degrees. Parents were very committed to getting the student in education because it was such a challenge for them. The person has their master's. And almost everyone went to college in their high school. It was just a given. So this person's mom always talked about college, even though she didn't go. And she was excited. Process,
yeah, that's great. So that's great. I like the one about the mom who didn't go but always talked about it. So we can go to the next slide. We'll come back to that comment about those conversations that are so helpful. So right now, as April was saying, we really, you hear it. We hear a lot. Take care of yourself. Take care of yourself. And then you get a lot of work piled on you, right? but we really do need to take care of ourselves so that we can be present for our students, but also so that we can model for our students how it is that we do take care of ourselves. One of the things I like to do is start every professional development or classroom exercise with a simple mindfulness exercise. One of the easiest ones that we can go to, and maybe you all have seen it, if you want to click on that mindful exercise, April, and pull that up, it says mindful exercise in the blue. There we go. Oh, maybe it won't.
Yeah. You want me to let you?
So it might not, I don't have the things pulled up, but I can pull up the Calm and show you. I don't know how many of you have used Calm or Headspace. I think it's a nice way to transition students into the classroom. So this is what Calm looks like. They're both pretty comparable. They have some different features. Calm, Headspace, there's a few other ones out there that are pretty good. Breathe to relax. There's some great YouTube videos. You can just sort of start collecting and curating your own little playlist. But one of the things I like about Calm is that you can pick from music, scenes, a meditation of any length. So let's say you got kids coming into your classroom. It's pretty noisy, and maybe some kids are coming in with some baggage. And if you had, let's cut the sound on for this. You picked one of these scenes. I don't know why that isn't. Wow, we're surely having some technical difficulty here. That would pull up. I think you guys can see that there's some different scenes here, but when you click on it, let me try to refresh and see if that does anything. It should pull up. This is usually what it does. Take a deep breath. So I've refreshed it. Maybe want to go to home. There we go. So this is what they would see, and you can have sound come on with that. Let me see if I can adjust the sound here, or I have already selected some music that I want to play. So it could be any one of these. There's a lot in here. Let's see if my sound will come through. Are you guys hearing that at all?
No.
I don't think it is. I don't think it is unless I've got something I can play through there. So you get the idea is that when you have your kids coming into your classroom, let me see if it could be user error with, I don't see anything I could have clicked on differently. So you get the idea that you could have that up on your screen, and you could have some music playing, and you could even take it a step further. And once your kids are seated, you could have a question on the board, just like we did. I'm going to stop showing my screen now. And I'm going to turn that back over to you, to our presentation.
There we go.
Okay. So you have something visual we want to think about for students to connect with. You can have some music playing, and you could just have them do a simple breathing exercise. So even right now, while we're sitting here, if you want to just put your hands in your lap, or relax your arms, put them by your side, and your feet flat on the ground. And the nice thing about having a visual is not every person or student is comfortable closing their eyes to do something like this, but you can invite students to close their eyes if they're comfortable, or to focus on the screen or the visual, whether it's, if you get this, this presentation and you can get to these links, it's one of these colorful toys that opens and expands, and you could have kids breathe with that. Or for right now, we can just close our eyes if you're comfortable. I can't see you, you can't see me. And just take a minute to get focused on our day, our morning together, and breathe in for about a 3 count, and breathe out. And let's take 2 more deep breaths, breathing slowly in You can put your hand on your belly and feel your stomach expanding and breathe out. And the last one, just together, breathing in and breathe out. So some variations on that is you can have students, if they're comfortable, they can put their hand here on their chest and feel their chest expanding, or on their belly, and kind of get them just connected to the day, to your classroom. Maybe some of you have done grounding exercises before, where you have a student just in their chair, push down with their feet and pull up on the bottom of their chair just as hard as they can. And that's another connection and grounding piece. Again, just to get students kind of focused in the present, trying to leave out what's going on out there in their world, whether it was an argument in the hallway or something that happened at home. Because what we want to do with our students is we want to build relationships with them. I think we know that, but it's always good to have reminders. It's good for me to be reminded with the people in my lives, because we get very busy and school piles a lot on our frontline workers, our teachers, our counselors. And so reminding ourselves that no matter what, and this is hard, even before we start teaching, we want to think about building those relationships and thinking of them as the foundation for our and the students' health, mental health, and to really have them ready for learning. I personally think that relationships can make or break a student's ability to overcome barriers to post-secondary education, because they have to trust you and they have to believe that you are really interested in their lives. And that can be as simple as that good morning that you do with them every day, when you greet them at the door, when you call them by name, when you go to their after-school activities if you're able to, when you know something about them that you can ask, when you say, hey, did you get your FSA ID done? I remember you told me you were going to do that. You were going to work on that. And did your parents need any help with that? How's your college application going? Having those conversations, it's not something that can just be in the counselor's office. It has to be school-wide, I believe, so that students know everybody's interested in where I'm going when I leave high school. So I don't know how many of you out there are using CASEL's 3 signature practices. I've also got that link there that you can reflect on. It's got the toolkit. So when you get this presentation, hopefully you'll be able to click on that and get that. But the 3 signature practices here in Buncombe County, we are encouraging all of our teachers to include at least 1, ideally 3. And so that would be a welcoming inclusion activity, just like what we did, having a question on the board. I know you've been in meetings where they have memes up there and ask you, what cat are you? Kids love those things. What Yoda are you? I've seen things to where kids can begin building commonalities with each other, and they kind of can let you know how they're feeling that day. What's your weather report? Ask the kids, let them tell you, are they having a sunny day or a cloudy day? So that's a welcoming and inclusion activity. Education strategies and brain breaks and transitions. So what are we doing in the middle of our teaching, whether it's getting them up to stretch, do a grounding exercise, personalizing the learning, those are, doing something where they get a break, but they're also incorporating a little bit of what they've been working on. And then the third strategy is an optimistic closure. So when you're using these strategies in the classroom, you're building predictable routines, and you're building a community, and you're building relationships. And I believe more than ever, they're important to help students learn to think about their future and to feel safe. And right now during COVID, I think we just need that more than ever. So let's go on to the next slide. So let's think about, I found a wonderful little video. We can listen to us, the adults, talking all day, but this is a video I found, and I hope it will come up because we didn't test these, but this is YouTube. Let's see if she clicks on this, if this will work for us. All right, so I'm sorry about that, but it's a wonderful it's about a 4-minute video, and these students are just talking about what it's been like for them. If you haven't had let's see, the time to sit with kids and hear what they're going through from their perspective, not just us reading the surveys. That gives a pretty good overview of what it's been like for them. And these are older teenage kids, so you can imagine with them just managing their mental health during COVID and their social relationships, which are so important, and their fears and worries about what's happening with public health, with what's going on in our political culture, what's going on globally. It's just a lot to manage. So if we can maybe give them a space to talk about that, even if it's just a check-in, how are you doing today? And then this is a self-care check-in also that I found from Arcadia Unified School District. They've got some wonderful resources on their site. I don't know if this is something that you could, recreate and have on hand at your school, but I think it's nice to have some reminders of what it is we can do to take care of ourselves. Having a little easy to go through checklist and go through it with kids. One thing I know is that we should never really assume what it is that our kids know. Do they really know how to take care of themselves? Maybe they do, and maybe they don't. Maybe they never thought that writing a gratitude list might be a way to help them feel better, that spending time outdoors versus sitting inside would be good for them. So kind of going through some of this with them. And it also might remind us of what our go-to strategy is. So if you want to put it in the chat, if you have something on here is your go-to strategy for self-care, or is there something else that you don't see on here that you could share with your students that really works for you? For me, they say go for a walk or exercise. They have a little yoga person down here, but when I can actually commit to doing it, yoga is pretty good for me. I know for me, taking a walk is great. What about the rest of you? What do you see on here that is something that you regularly go to take care of yourself?
So we're hearing get outside and get moving, hike, walk, and cuddle with a pet, or just some alone time in general. Go to the gym, gratitude practices. Someone likes to craft and paint, running and weightlifting, exercise, another painting. So we're having some good ones come through. Watch a movie, spend time walking the neighborhood with family.
Yeah.
We're having some good ones. I know for me, I like to get outside and go for a walk. I've started gardening, mostly killing things, but I'm gardening since COVID started. So that's nice. And I'm the same, watching a movie, watching TV, spending time with grandchildren, someone said, so they get a different perspective. I think that's great.
Yeah. In thinking about this activity with your students, have it be, don't show them this and just do a brainstorming session and, write it on the board, or have them go around the room and, you could have different stations of indoor activities, outdoor activities, alone activities, together activities, and let them develop that. And you could even just turn it into, have some students turn it into a poster that's in your classroom, all the time. So that's just some ideas about how you could get them involved. You could do that virtually. You could do that with breakout rooms. You could do that in your classroom. Everybody might be teaching in different settings. So think about ways that you could get this to become a conversation in your classroom. It doesn't have to take a lot of time. And then you could refer back to it when it seems like it's been a rough week, or wow, we're getting ready for tests and it is really stressful, or it's college application week, or there's a deadline coming up. What are you doing from your self-care list, students, that you can do to take care of yourself this week when these are very stressful activities that you're going through? So I would encourage you to think about that and modeling that for your students. Let me move my. So how do we encourage students to stay on track and motivated to reach their post-secondary goals that they had or that they did have pre-pandemic? Because some of them might be feeling pretty discouraged. You know, I think they're going to be on every end of the continuum right now, and probably even almost even more polarized. We'll see more kids that have kind of given up, and more kids are like, man, I just want to get out of here and I want to get moving and I want to. But I think more often than not, they're going to have a decrease in motivation for any college activities that they had thought they were having for themselves. So, I mean, I can just go from what I know works and from the research and the PD that we've focused on here, and that is trying to create a college-going culture in your classroom. And that can look like, you know, getting your alma mater school banners, posters, posting ACT and SAT questions of the day on your board, wearing your college gear. You know, CFNC has that wonderful activity and poster that, you know, tell me about it when you talk about where you went and what your decisions were for going to college, because these kids may be coming from families where they really haven't had those discussions, and they don't know what is the difference between a 2-year, a 4-year college, graduate school, bachelor's. They just don't know that. So we just make them regular parts of our conversation. You know, they may think the only college is just 4-year college and I'm not doing that. They may not have even considered what a community college or a certificate program might mean for them, and how it could change their lives in some ways and get them to their goals. And so pay attention when you're having these conversations to what they don't know. Never assume, especially for our first generation students, when we start throwing out around words or terms, that again, what's a major and what's a minor? What does that even mean? Or, you know, just when you can incorporate that into whatever class that you're teaching, when you're teaching math, and you can talk about what scores do you need and how do you get there. Any conversations, again, you're going back to you're building relationships with them, and you're making it just kind of normal and natural. It's not just, I don't go to school just for subject areas. I'm going to school to develop my whole self, and talking about college is one way we do that. And encourage your school to do the same thing. Put things on the digital bulletin boards outside. When, you know, we see things about the games, but when is FAFSA due? And when is our college night? I want to see that on the digital boards. I want to see that on our web pages. Information going home to parents, because parents don't know either, and they need some help. And then bring in the helpers for FAFSA, college application days, and RDS. You, as if you're a classroom teacher, invite folks from local colleges to come into your classroom. They probably are doing it at some of your college nights. We can start doing this. We don't have to wait to senior year to talk about FAFSA. We can start doing those FSA IDs junior year. So starting to provide help for the students and the parents at the school is one way to keep them motivated and give them the resources that they need. More important than ever. So I've talked a little bit more than I wanted to, because my audio visual didn't really work for me today, but is there something that you've heard today that you want to take back to your classroom or your school and begin implementing, something that you haven't done? Maybe you haven't talked about this in your classroom. Are there things that you need to carry out any ideas that you're starting to generate? And if you want to put that in the chat, this would be our optimistic closure. If we're following Castle's 3 signature practices, we want to look towards when we leave the day or the time that you spent with me, what's something that you can do back in your classroom?
So while we wait for some folks to send them in, I think one of the thoughts I know that I had while you were going through this, and this relates to also our best practices panel that we had on Monday, is when you're thinking about whether you're doing it, you know, during the month of October or not, but if you're thinking about college application week or the different events you're going to have during Countdown to College, something as simple as playing music in the background for the kids, something soothing, maybe off from Calm, you know, as they're going through and doing all of this. It can be stressful to submit applications and RDS and do your FAFSA, and maybe some nice calming music.
Well, and you know, I was going to say, April, I do remember when we did that when I was at the school, and during those times, we did try to create some energy and excitement. So we would usually get some of their playlists and make those college applications. We'd give them those little stickers when they left, and we would take their picture. We would post their pictures up. So we would make it kind of a celebration. So I would even say use the music as energizing during those points when there's a group of them around. So you could go either way with that.
And we have two other suggestions that have come through. One of your suggestions that people have enjoyed. Someone likes the idea of the grounding techniques when students are in the classroom. And I think that's great too, especially if you have them come in and start the process of applying to college and everything. You know, do one before you even have them start during college application week. We have one school. They're having college application info sessions at Irwin tomorrow, and this is helping them to remember to end their presentations by reminding their students to take care of themselves and offering some of those resources to help them do so.
Well, there's a lot of good information following my part of the presentation. So April, I appreciate you having me here to share a little bit, some ideas, and I hope that everybody enjoys the rest of their week if they come to more of these sessions. And thank you to CFNC for providing these sessions for us.
Thank you so much, Suzanne, for joining us this morning. And the last slide of this presentation has all of our contact information on it again. And so it'll have Suzanne's email address if you wanted to talk to her about any of these or have any further questions. And I'm going to pass this over to Fred Holden in just a moment, but feel free to continue to send questions in, and we can keep monitoring those and assist you as we go through the rest of this presentation this morning. So thank you so much, Suzanne. And I'm going to pass this over to Fred Holden now. He's the Financial Aid Director at UNCW, and he's going to talk to you all a little bit about some financial aid basics to make sure that we kind of have that understanding, especially as we think about all of this in relation to college access. And our goal, hopefully, is to reduce their stress related to financial aid. And if you have any questions, feel free to continue to send them over, and I will pass this over to Fred now. Thank you so much, Fred, for joining us.
Sure. Thanks for having me, April. Good morning, professionals. I'm happy to be here. I'm Fred Holden. I'm the Director of the Office of Scholarships and Financial Aid here at UNC Wilmington. As April mentioned, I just want to kind of give some basics around the financial aid process. It's already a very complex and challenging process for families because we're dealing with their income and their assets. So during COVID, it's even more complicated and stressful. So I just want to give you some of the basics here. And hopefully, anytime that you're interfacing with students, you're able to assist them. As April also shared, you can definitely reach out to me if you have any questions at the end. You can also share your questions, and maybe we'll be able to answer some of them. I actually have experience at UNC Chapel Hill, Duke, North Carolina Central, and now at UNC Wilmington. So I have a pretty diverse background when it comes to working with different higher education systems. So hopefully I'll be able to answer most of your questions, if not all of them, at the end if you have any. You've already heard probably a little bit about emergency relief money. I'm not really going to talk about our HERF money. HERF stands for Higher Education Emergency Relief Fund. I don't know if that money is going to be in place after this academic year, so I don't want to go into detail about it, but that was money that the federal government provided to higher education institutions to help students during this really tough time. So if more money is made available in the future, I'm sure that'll be made public, and that information can be shared later at a later date. So the FAFSA opens in just a couple weeks, October the 1st. It's very, very important to make sure that students are using the right resources to apply. So there are two different websites. They all point to the same location. It's FAFSA.gov and studentaid.gov. There are some websites out there like .coms or maybe even .net. Those are not official websites, and students might have to pay to use those. And there's no benefit in using one of those unofficial websites. So make sure that students are using the right link and that they are not paying to complete the application. FAFSA stands for Free Application of Federal Student Aid. So making sure that they are not paying to apply for aid is very important. Completing the FAFSA allows students to be considered for federal loans, grants, and state grants and institutional grants. And many schools award in the order that students apply because they don't have an endless supply of institutional funding. Same thing for the state. So that's why it's really, really, really important for students to complete that FAFSA on October 1st or as close to October 1st as possible. And just about every school will require the FAFSA because it does consider students for the most aid. So federal aid, state aid, and institutional aid. And you may have already heard about the CSS profile, but I like to call that application the FAFSA on steroids. The CSS profile, it just goes into a little bit more detail, asking for more information from those families. The schools that use the CSS profile are usually those that meet full need, that have lots of financial aid to award. And in North Carolina, I think the only schools that use the CSS profile are UNC Chapel Hill, Davidson, Duke, and Wake. Scholarships. Each school will have its own process to process their scholarships. So it's always important for students to make sure that they're aware of what that university is doing. So they need to look at that admissions page, or that financial aid office page. They probably will have some type of checklist or receive emails from that institution, but there's going to be a different process just about for every school, or it will be some variety. Some schools will award just based on the admissions application alone. At UNCW, we do some of that, but not only that. So we don't want students to just apply for admission and then wait for scholarships. There may also be a scholarship application that they need to complete. Our scholarship application opens up December the 1st, and then the priority date is March the 1st. Each school will have different dates, different processes. It's just very important that students take that time to ensure they know what each school is requiring. There are also outside scholarships. There are thousands and thousands of outside scholarships. And I know it's kind of cliche to say money is always left on the table, but if students don't apply, those companies can't award those scholarships. I just have a couple examples of websites where students can apply. Students can literally go out to Google and search outside scholarships. Many of the search engines that are out there will allow them to type in keywords, their major, their background, their experiences, and find scholarships that might match to them. I would also encourage here that they not pay to apply for outside scholarships. There are too many free resources out there, so I don't want students to feel like if I put money in, that I'll get money back. All right, let's go to the next slide. All right, so federal verification, you may be familiar or have heard of it. When students complete the FAFSA, there's a chance they may be selected for federal verification. At UNCW, about 20% of our students are selected for verification. And what it requires is that that student needs to provide some additional financial information for us to verify that the information they submitted is correct and making sure that we are compliant with the federal government. It may be that they need to complete a worksheet that shows who's living in their household. They might need to turn in a verification of non-filing letter, a W-2, or a tax return or a tax return transcript. Some people are, I would say most are probably selected randomly. It's a requirement from the federal government, so there's going to be some random selection. There are also some that are selected because there's some type of conflicting information. So there are some rules that look and say if A, then B, and if it's out of that range, the Department of Education knows that there's some conflicting information, and they'll ask that you have to turn in some documentation to be verified. If they don't complete the verification process, they will not be able to receive their financial aid. They may be able to receive a scholarship, but they can't receive anything that requires the FAFSA. An example that I give there about conflicting information is that they file taxes that say single, but then the FAFSA indicates that they're married. So that means that they should have taxes that are married filing jointly or married filing separately. So whenever there's conflicting information like that, we have to always resolve it. And there's some rules in the background that also help to make sure that families are completing the FAFSA correctly. I think the most important thing here is for families to know that being selected for verification doesn't mean that they necessarily did anything wrong. And even if they did something wrong, they could have done it accidentally. It's easy to input data the wrong data by mistake. Put in an extra 1 or an extra 0. But the important thing is to make sure that we get the most accurate information in the FAFSA so that students are receiving the aid that they're truly eligible to receive. And it's also important to make sure that they check their emails and respond to these requests that are being sent to them and submit those responses quickly. Next slide, please. All right, so then on this slide, I just have some last financial aid tips, kind of general tips. Again, FAFSA submission October the 1st. It's just a couple weeks away. we know that students are really busy trying to focus on high school, and then they have challenges like COVID and things that have come along with COVID. So we're doing all we can at UNCW to ensure that our outreach is strong. We have just started a calling campaign for all of our students who qualify for need-based aid. We've also started the process of where we're going to be mailing out a postcard to all of our students who are Pell eligible students. And if you're not aware, Pell eligible students are our students that are our highest need, our lowest income populations. We want to make sure that they do not miss out on applying for aid. So a lot of other schools will be doing some things as well. We'll be doing financial aid nights where we go out to the high schools and help families with completion of the FAFSA. We are also going to have some on campus in a couple of weeks as well, and we're going to help them with their FAFSA. And we'll do this throughout the year, but we are very intentional about our outreach in the last 2 weeks of September and then the first week or two of October. Because of COVID, we have to be extra careful and be very selective about what events that we can do right now, but we will be definitely very safe and follow all the protocols that are required. The FAFSA looks at the taxes 2 years prior. So sometimes you'll have a family that'll say, oh, I can't do the FAFSA because my parents have not completed their taxes. Well, 6 or 7 years ago, that might have been the thought, but now that taxes are being used from 2 years prior, that's been going on for, I think, at least 5 years. There's no need to wait for taxes to be filed because the current year taxes are not going to be used. So if you ever hear that, say, no, you can go ahead and complete the FAFSA. Now, you can even estimate tax information into the FAFSA. So there's really no reason not to complete the FAFSA on time. One thing that'll be very different this year, and it has been for the past couple of years because of COVID, and then we had some hurricanes that have hit North Carolina, is that families are going through a lot of different special scenarios and circumstances. So it may be that 2 years prior, that tax information is not accurate anymore. So each school will have some process of special circumstances or professional judgments that can be made based on a student scenario. So if you know a student that, their family has been unemployed for a couple of years or maybe a little bit less because of COVID, or maybe they're still just trying to recover from some of the natural disasters that we've experienced or anywhere on the East Coast or in the U.S. at all, those students should reach out to that school to say, hey, this is what's going on with me, and is there any type of resource available? And it's very likely that there's some type of process that institution can tap into. And sometimes it's not related to natural disasters or things like COVID. It could be that there's a divorce in the family, or maybe there's a death of a parent, unfortunately, or maybe there was just some major expense that came up. Maybe the roof had to be replaced and it cost $20,000. Those are all special circumstances and possible things that schools can consider. So they should always reach out to their financial aid counselor to see if there's additional help that's available. A couple questions on the FAFSA that need to definitely be accurate, and if they're not accurate, it can impact their aid, is work study. They're asked if they're interested in work study. Do they want to work part-time on campus? That's basically what work study is. And if they do, or if they think they do, they should answer that question in the affirmative so that way they can be considered for work study dollars. Did their parents complete high school or college? A lot of schools will have funding that goes to first-generation students. So answering this question is important as well. If they don't answer it or answer it incorrectly, they may miss out on some aid opportunities. And then it also asks what degree they're working on. If they leave this blank or say a non-degree or a graduate degree instead of their current, their bachelor's or associates, they may miss out on grant money that only goes to students who are working on their first bachelor's or associate's degree. So they need to answer those questions accurately. If they select the data retrieval tool and complete that in the FAFSA and transfer their taxes from the IRS directly into the FAFSA, that reduces the likelihood of them having any errors on the FAFSA. So that also will reduce the likelihood of them being selected for verification. The official way to communicate with students is going to be via email. So students have to check their email, their personal email, and the institution's email address has been assigned to them regularly. They don't want to miss out on important emails because they may miss out on aid. So making sure that they're checking their emails and responding to those emails by the published deadlines that are on the financial aid and the admissions office's websites. Deposits are often required to indicate that the student is intending to come to that school. So if they don't make that deposit by the time that the school said that those are due, usually it's by May 1st, but it may be different from school to school. But if they don't do that, then the aid will ultimately be canceled and we'll assume that the student is not attending. Some schools will have a process where students can request a waiver of that deposit if the deposit is required. So they should also reach out to admissions offices, or if you're working with students, you can reach out to those admissions offices to see what is needed. maybe a reduced lunch document or free lunch document is needed, or some other type of documentation that you may have could help them be able to have that deposit waived. You should not, however, as a student should not have to deposit in order to receive their financial aid. Financial aid should be offered just based on the student being admitted. So I would always question if the student says, oh, I don't have access to something because I didn't deposit. Not having access to sign up for orientation, yes, I understand that, but access to apply for aid would be a barrier. So I would always question if any school said that that was necessary for the student. Always encourage the students to reach out to financial aid offices early. In the summer, it can get really, really busy for our offices, and the response time can maybe take up to a week. It really depends on how many staff members are available. In the past year, because of COVID, we've had a lot of people out. We've been in flux with people having to make sure they take care of their families because of COVID. So if students were to start reaching out now all the way through spring, we'll probably be able to respond the same day. Typical response time is 1 to 2 business days, but applying early and reaching out early is important. Remembering that financial aid administrators are here to assist students and make sure that they help them with access and accessibility. We're certainly not forcing a student to come to our school. So if a student was to reach out to UNCW but was thinking more that they might go to UNCG, but they were having a great conversation and connecting well with our office, our financial aid office will still assist them. Oftentimes students will say, I have 3 awards, I don't know which one is the best. They can bring or submit them to us, or we can do a Zoom meeting and we'll go through those awards. We want to make sure that students are making important decisions accurately. If affordability is the most important thing, we want to make sure that they're looking at things like apples to apples. Different schools will include different costs, external costs and internal costs. You want to make sure that you're looking at the same information. So making sure that everybody has the same estimated costs, and we'll walk through that with students. So again, we're focused on outreach to our students and making sure that they understand the financial aid process, and not that they just have to come to UNCW. It's not that type of exchange. So that's what the financial aid administrators are there for, and they will certainly be available to assist. So we can go to the next slide. And what I'm going to do now is actually turn things back over to April. Our case manager provided a lot of useful information as well. And I think April will walk through some of those resources. And then if there are any questions at the end, I'd be happy to assist. All right, April, thank you.
Thank you so much, Fred. I hope everyone found all of those tips helpful and all of the information. As we know, the whole process of getting ready for post-secondary education can be overwhelming for students, especially first-generation families. And a big piece of that is the financial aid process. Like I said, especially if it's a family who hasn't been through it before, or if a student is working through it on their own. And so I think it's really helpful to know that we have resources at our institutions all across the state, our 2-year and our 4-year schools, and their financial aid offices you're going to find are fabulous and willing and happy to help students through this process, whether they're planning on attending that institution or not. So it really does take a village to get all of our students to and through school. So we want to provide you all with some more resources. So these are resources from, as Fred said, the case manager and ENW counseling offices, and I have the link here, and you'll find all of this also in the handout that's on the right-hand side of your screen in the handout section. But these are some more resources for our students. So building a sense of meaning and purpose, social support, gratitude, and the ability to express emotion safely is the key for resiliency, especially in high school age students. So we're going to talk a little bit about trauma, what's been going on the last 18 months, tying some of this back into what Suzanne talked about, and then a little bit more of what Fred talked about here. So we know our goal for our students, and so let's talk about a few more potential activities for your students as we're thinking about the idea of them building this sense of meaning and purpose and the ability to express those emotions safely, and training the brain to see the positives rather than the negatives. And we're going to talk a little bit about small steps, breaking things up into chunks, especially as we think about what we've all been going through and what's not over yet. So service projects, the idea of giving back. For some students, that may be an activity that helps them get out of their own mind frame and their own box, and that's something that definitely works for me too. Sometimes I need that reminder that there's a big world out there, and it's not necessarily just what's happening in my everyday life. So those service projects can be nice. Writing a letter to someone who has helped them. Could be an email, although I think that the idea of writing a letter to someone can be helpful in this entire college access process. This could be something that we involve our English class in, maybe an English class activity, especially as we think about getting our students practice in those thank you letter writing skills. For folks that are writing them letters of recommendation or who have made just a positive impact on them, you know, throughout their high school career or just during the last 18 months or so. Journaling, so we know that 21 days is about right to create a new habit. That's why 3 weeks is key to this. But journaling is something I think that we can all do, as well as have our students do. Just write something positive maybe that happened to them to help get our minds leaning towards the positivity and maybe some positive things that are happening in our lives and not just the negative. And sometimes it could be something small, like, you know, I hit all the green lights on my way to school, to bigger things. You know, I got a good grade on that test that I had been stressing about for a long time. So there are some positives that we can focus on. And having any type of positive social interactions with our students, if they can be in sunlight or in nature, even better. So if there is any sort of possibility, if you are having face-to-face classes, if you guys are in full face-to-face and not virtually, to move things outside, not only is that sunlight going to hopefully improve mental health, but also it's better for COVID, you know, to be outside and to be distanced a little. But that sunlight and doing anything that you can outside could be wonderful. Providing a space to express emotions. So that could be something small or passive, like a bulletin board that you have outside of your office. Suzanne talked a little bit about the idea of, I think it was, I forget what she was saying, the yoga, not yoga, the Star Wars stuff. Yoga. So we can make this fun, but the idea of, you know, what are you feeling like today? You know, as we kind of come in. And these are things that we do with our students when they're younger, right? The idea of the socio-emotional when the students are younger. And as we know, by the time they get into high school, a lot of this is forgotten. There's just so many things to focus on for our students. You know, there's testing, there's, you know, whatever it is we have going on. But bringing that back in can be really good. And then don't forget about yoga and meditation. Hopefully some of the PE classes at your school have brought some of this in, especially as we've gone through the last 18 months. But that can be great too, and doing it outside even better. Okay, so a few other activities here. Being in a creative space and that allows you to utilize both sides of your brain. So making things, painting, listening to music while addressing tough times, music in the classroom. And we've talked about the idea of music. Something very simple. When we do these programs and when I attend like webinars that are like this, I love it when I can come away with at least a couple of simple ideas that I can implement right away. So we don't always want everything to be big picture. Oh, okay, well, if X, Y, and Z happens, maybe I can do that. Bring music into your classroom. And how your students respond to that could be different. So Suzanne talked a little bit about the idea of energizing music. And for me, when, you know, going through some of this stuff the last 18 months, sometimes I've felt anxiety. And so what I need is to bring it down. And that calming, quiet music sometimes can be the most helpful thing to kind of, you know, allow me to relax a little to do some things that I need to work on. So depending on what your students need, you know, while you're doing applications, while they're doing their FAFSA form, if you're going to have a FAFSA completion night or a financial aid workshop, especially a FAFSA completion night where they're working through their FAFSAs on individual computers, music, something maybe calm, some steady music. Strength finders, and we're going to talk about strength finders and executive functioning skills on the next slide. But strength finders, so this would be helping students recognize some of their strengths, especially during difficult times. And this could be done through an admissions essay. So sometimes during junior year, for example, we'll have students think about a general admissions essay that they can have and work on and just put aside, and perhaps use pieces of that for their true admissions essay when it comes time to apply. And usually we'll say, well, think about a time that was difficult in your life and how you moved on through that, or how you were able to cope with that. And that could include thinking about their strengths. And so that could be a sample activity that also gets them geared up for college access. Executive functioning skill building. So this is the mental process that enables us to, plan, focus attention, remember things, juggle multiple tasks. And I would say that probably all of us are struggling with this at this point, with being virtual. And I think that has pushed us to feel like we need to juggle more as not actually driving into an office every day, although a lot of you are back face-to-face now. But this is something I think a lot of us have started struggling with. So this includes 12 different skills, and I have them listed here, but we'll talk about that in just a minute. And then some self-care activities that we've already talked about. And so hopefully we have some good ideas of what we can do as we, leave for ourselves as well as for our students, and maybe even the families of our students. So I have some resources here that, again, are in the handout if you want to take a look at them later. The Edutopia article is probably my favorite out of these. And it talks about some true examples, again, of things that we can do to help with those executive functioning skills and self-regulation. So a couple of easy things: having checkers, some different games in your space, or perhaps in your counseling area, the school counseling office. Maybe there's a space for students to go in and work on things, so there's music and there's board games and there's some opportunities for them to practice yoga or do some mindfulness activities. And so some of these games, like checkers, Jenga, Uno, so they involve strategy. So those are just some examples of games. And when students have games that involve strategy, it gives them an opportunity to make plans of what's going to happen next, like checkers and chess, for example. And so that helps them with their inhibitory control and their cognitive flexibility and those working memories to help, strategize those situations. It could also help them in the real world. And another simple example, encouraging them to have checklists and a planner or a calendar if they don't already, to help break down those large tasks so they aren't so overwhelmed. The idea of going to college can be a big idea when it's not a pandemic. And when we add the pandemic and everything that's been going on in our students' lives, the idea of doing college admissions and completing RDS and doing their FAFSA form and possibly that CSS profile and doing scholarship applications can 200% still overwhelming for some of our students. And so breaking this down, especially just bringing this back to what our point of topic is today, if we think about Countdown to College and the different activities, how we have broken those weeks up, that may be something to help them make it not feel so overwhelming for this entire process. So before I forget, you all are welcome to go to cfnc.org/C2C. We have a calendar of virtual events in there for the entire month of October to break some of this down for them. Week 1 is planning for college. So if they haven't decided on a major, which of course they have time for that, but at least a major area, do some planning. At the second week, they can think about their FAFSA form and residency, perhaps. Maybe we have some activities for them that week, and we have virtual assistance. Week 3 is college application. And then week 4 is I've applied, now what? So what do I do now that I have done some of these activities? So breaking all of this down. So some resources for finding your strengths. Again, I have lots of different resources and things for you to click on in the actual handout. But these are some different skill matchers. One is from NC Careers, which of course we partner with. This is a great one from the University of Toronto with this strengths-based resilience lesson for them, and it's a little more interactive to go through. Your students can consider creating their own SWOT analysis, which is something I have absolutely never done, is do a personal SWOT analysis. Red Bull actually has something called a Red Bull Wing Finder that students might enjoy to think about where your strengths live, and again, get back in the positive side of things. And then therapistaid.com also has a free strengths and qualities worksheet. And we've talked about some of these applications already, but making sure your students know about some of these. I will say that Calm is the one that I use. That's the one I'm most familiar with, and they do have a free version as well as a paid-for version. And then I wanted to bring it back to some of the resources that UNCW specifically has. They actually have a page on their website that is mental health and COVID-19 resources at UNCW. And they have a lot more than just what I have on the screen, but these blue boxes show you some of the resources they have. Their counseling center operations during COVID, telemental health, emotional support. They have a 24/7 crisis hotline that they list there. Distancing tips, self-care habits, and then some reminders down here. Be careful on COVID-19 overload. That's a good tip for all of us. Sometimes you have to turn off the news and stop listening to stuff. Beware of misinformation. And keep in mind that a lot of our institutions have food pantries. So UNCW's is called Hawks Harvest, and it is an opportunity for students who maybe have food insecurities to head to a certain area on campus and get some food to help them, get by as we go through this. So again, as your students are considering college access, and I don't know, I have so many things I'm worried about and nervous about, remind them that our institutions have resources for them, such as this, to help them with, self-care and mental support and food insecurities, okay? And so I have this up here specifically because I wanted it in the handout for you, and I have a couple of slides like this, but these are more resources for you and your students. Even resources for students with accessibility challenges, development disabilities, substance abuse services. As they're heading into college, we may have, compounding things going on with our families. So just make sure that you, grab that handout. There's a lot there. And there's also some different TED Talks, which gets us back to that video that we were trying to show you with sound issues that Suzanne was offering. TED Talks are always, something fun maybe for students to listen to. There's one specifically that's the team's perspective, and this one is a little different from the one that Suzanne showed you, which is great because we have more resources for you. But it's great to allow our students to have that near-peer experience, and they're not just hearing it from us as far as, the experience goes in a perspective of what we've all been through during COVID-19. And this is a resource, and this is the website up here I wanted to give you. UNCW also has some videos and podcasts on their website to provide students with all kinds of different resources. Maybe a podcast they can listen to, for something in the classroom, get outside, listen to some of this and enjoy. And there is also a specific episode that I wanted to share with you that's a podcast called In Social Work. And this one is called Back to School This Fall, Addressing Trauma's Impact with Care and Growth. And there's some really good resources in here as we think about trauma and what our students have been through as they're returning to school. And I have the link here, and again, it'll be in the handout. But the gist from this specific podcast is, trauma matters because it produces symptomology. And these symptoms impact our learning, memory, and feeling. So all of this trauma is impacting our students' ability, as to not only learn in the classroom, but to also consider, what's going to be happening when COVID ends, if it ends, right? So chronic trauma, which is what COVID is not acute. So we don't have a specific endpoint, right, when this will be over. It's very uncertain. And we aren't necessarily all set up, and we're not all equipped to handle chronic trauma. Examples of acute trauma might be a hurricane, a fire, a building collapses. COVID is chronic, so it's a little different. And we've all struggled as well, and that self-care piece for all of us is also critical, as we talked about earlier. If possible, we'd love to avoid silos, right? Interdisciplinary teams to help us plan for how we're going to help our students go through, college access in the light of COVID-19. And make sure that we are acknowledging and memorializing staff who perhaps have passed away from COVID. So re-traumatization can happen, for our students and for all of us when we are put back into, someone passing away, something more personal through all of this, right? And we can all share what we've all been going through over the last 18 months. Usually when I'm in the classroom with students, I have an hour with them to encourage them to attend college, do a college application, maybe do a career assessment. And in that hour, it is my job to get them to care about the process, but also listen to me. So who is this lady coming in as a guest speaker, and why am I listening to her tell me all of these things I need to do for careers and for college? And one of the ways that I'm able to do that pretty quickly is share personal stories and experiences from myself. And so that's usually something that I can help click with the students to hopefully get them to listen to me as far as college access. And so we have some other tips on here. I encourage you guys to take a look, maybe listen to this podcast. It's only about 35 minutes, and it's a good one. Even little things. What are we putting on our school walls, and that space we've talked about maybe creating in your counseling center if you can have it for your students, right? And also, you know, as we think about, and I talked about this at the beginning, and this is another resource for you all. We have certain students that perhaps may be experiencing all of this in different ways and already had insecurities before COVID happened, and then we want to add to it. So we find that disparities widen during crises like COVID-19, right? And so our low income, underrepresented minority students, first gen students, they may have increased stressors at home. So food, shelter. When you're not sure where you're going to live, college isn't usually a first priority, right? If you're not sure if power is going to stay on this winter to heat your home, you aren't necessarily thinking about the FAFSA form. And so working through and identifying some of these students, of course, that may have some extra challenges, and allowing us to assist them, and even bringing in some of those resources that we mentioned for help, having a FAFSA completion night. That you have a community, we have more resources. You have your financial aid offices and your admissions offices and your CFNC reps. So we're here to help you through all of this. Okay? So let's make sure as we finish up today that we are taking time to remind students that as they're considering college options, virtual and hybrid options still exist. So a lot of colleges have excellent virtual programming. So consider that, including our 2-year and 4-year institutions, our public ones and our private ones in North Carolina. Remember that students may be considering factors that aren't necessarily something they had considered before, and for us to listen to that and accept that. Okay? So some of them may be strongly considering the location of the school as something that they hadn't done before. Perhaps you have a student who is considering an institution a few hours away, and they're suddenly coming to you and saying, I think I need to stay closer to home. I don't feel comfortable going away. I have a family member who's sick. I'm just nervous about all of this. Great. We have institutions all over North Carolina. And for many of us, we have a lot of options very close to us. And maybe learning about those commuter options, if that's something they're considering doing, and how that might impact involvement on campus and financial aid, and having those conversations. So some priorities might be changing for our students. And reminding them that our institutions have mental health and counseling centers. They have counselors that they can see on campus as part of their tuition and fees, okay? So that's on campus, and it will be free for our students to use those counseling centers on campus. They can live on campus. So if you're working with a student who's at risk of homelessness, for example, maybe they're thinking, I'm not sure about college. I don't know where I'm going to live. I don't have anywhere to live next year. How am I going to think about this? Okay, well, great. Did you know you can live on campus? And if you communicate with that campus, the financial aid office, the admissions office, and let them know that during winter break, for example, and the campus on-campus housing closes down, well, I don't know where I'm going to go during that winter break. Why am I going to live on campus when you're closing down for a few weeks and I don't have anywhere to live? A lot of institutions will let you stay on campus during those breaks, but you have to communicate and self-identify that you don't necessarily have somewhere to go. And remember that they can eat at school. So there's a meal plan that they can have as part of that cost of attendance. The financial aid will help cover if you're, applying for all of these things. And so there's a way for them to have sustaining meals on that campus. And there's financial aid programs that Fred talked to you about. There's scholarships. There's a way through this. And I think it's important for us to help our students visualize the future beyond COVID-19. Okay? So as I said before, there's a lot of things that we've gone over today. I encourage you all to grab the handout and take that with you, because there's so many different links in there for you to have and use. And I said at the end I would have this slide back up for you all to take a look and make sure that you have contact information for all of us. We truly appreciate you being here today, and I'm going to stop for just a moment and see if any of our speakers had anything they wanted to add that I may have missed. Okay, well, again, thank you all for attending not only this program, but all of the programs this week. We have had a really fun, I think, and diverse Education Professionals Week as we gear up for Countdown to College. We're excited for you all, and we're excited for our students. Please let us know how we can be of assistance, and thank you again. And for many of you, we'll see you on the road. So have a good rest of your week. Thank you again for joining, and we'll see you soon.